So over here on the NA version of the game, we have a surprise banner with Mordred, Lee Shwin, and Scheherazade. Now, I really don't want to talk about those other two losers, but I do like me some tomboys with glasses. So you know what? We're going to go ahead and talk about Mordred, because in the video I did yesterday, when I was kind of talking about all the people that were on this banner, Lee Shwin and Scheherazade may have some of their niche uses, but Mordred is one of those units that you could theoretically use now as a buster farmer, and she will get better as time goes on, as they did buff her first skill over on the JP version of the game, and it makes her really strong. I mean, she's closing in on being able to do as much damage as her dad over there, and may someday, you know, fingers crossed, they buff maybe the third skill, buff the NP again, she might finally be able to overtake him. But before we begin, if you have not already, make sure you leave a like in the video and you subscribe to the channel for that daily FGO content, as I'm going to make sure that you always have something FGO related to watch when you log into YouTube every day. Also, if you want to see me play FGO live, I do that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over on my Twitch, which is linked down in the description down below. But with that being said, let's go ahead and start diving into her kit, starting off with her hits. And she has what I would describe as just a very plain bread and butter, you know, very simplistic, straightforward kit. It's not particularly good, but it's not particularly bad. I mean, like, her NP gain is okay. Like, you do an arts crit, you get fine enough NP refund. You're not going to be refunding like 50, 60, 70% NP without really like investment. Say you want to bring up Castoria for some reason to really buff up those arts cards, right? But you'll get, you know, like 20, 30%. It's enough to let her fire her NP a few times during more difficult content. But if you're going to be using her as a buster farmer, you don't really care about that. Plus, because she is a buster unit, she has access to people like Koyenskaya, who give her the ability to refund on her buster cards, and you also have access to Merlin, who gives you NP every single turn. So realistically, she should be fine with all of these other supports kind of giving her NP, but she's not going to be as self-sufficient as, say, someone like Ereshkigal, right, who has this ridiculously OP arts card that can just refund all of her NP, or Masashi, who can kind of do the same thing with her double hits. But we also got to remember that she is a year 1 servant and she has like an okay kit. I think that's fine. There are definitely year 1 servants that got it off worse. Like, say someone like Ushiwakamaru, who is also a year 1 servant that has a really strong kit, but because their hits aren't quite where they need to be, it does hold them back a little bit. I do hope at some point, because they mentioned this in like year 3 or 4, that they wanted to go back and fix a lot of these old servants' hits and like maybe give them an additional hit or two. I do hope they eventually do that, because servants like Ushiwakamaru or even Mordred could really benefit from like getting an additional hit on, say, their arts card or something to really just help their refund out a little bit more. But all of her power is going to come from her skills, and they're all pretty strong at this point. I mean, before she gets the buff to her first skill, she's okay. You know, she'll be an okay looper, but pretty much is relegated to being a crit damage servant. But once they buff this first skill over here, which right now is just a mana burst, basically, it's like, okay, it's nice. You can loop it in farming. You know, you could fire it turn 1, you could fire it turn 3. That's all well and dandy, but they do fix it up because you can still loop the skill with Koyenskaya, but it's a buster buff that gives you 50% for 3 times for 3 turns. Now, since you're going to be using her for farming in this example, you're only ever going to fire 3 buster cards, ideally, and that's going to be your 3 NP. So that's really strong, and they gave her a 20% attack buff for 3 turns, which may not sound like a lot, but you got to consider she's getting a really high buster buff. With that attack buff, those 2 buff types are going to multiply into each other to give her significantly more damage, and it's not like she has a low attack stat either. Her attack stat is pretty good. And at least over here on JP, she's doing more damage than, say, the buster version of Ibuki, who also does some pretty good damage. If that just kind of puts in perspective how much damage she's able to do. Again, she's starting to close in on Artoria, and I wouldn't be surprised if they would be like, oh, we finally buffed her third skill, we gave her some extra NP damage buff or something, because that's pretty much what lets Artoria do so much more damage. We give her something like that, she might be on the same level as Dad over there. So I think that's really cool. They also did give her a buster crit buff for 3 turns. 30% isn't all that bad, especially when you consider her second skill over here that gives her 50% crit damage for 3 times for 3 turns is a little bit unfortunate because it does kind of cut down a little bit on how consistent her crits can be, but also do keep in mind she does have people like Merlin who can give her 100% crit damage for a turn, Koya and Sky can give her crit damage and stars and star weight specifically to her buster cards, which Mordred also does for a turn. Koyenskaya also partners very well with her because while Mordred can bomb 15 stars, she can give her 20. Merlin can give you stars from like 5 to 15 per turn consistently depending on your overcharge levels. So it does combo rather nicely because right now on NA, if you use her, you could have a really good buster crit turn, but then you kind of run out of your crit damage and then you might not do as much damage. But thankfully, with Merlin and Koyenskaya floating around and this first skill buff over here, it definitely makes her perform a lot better. The third skill is really the last thing they haven't buffed over here, and this one is actually rather nice. Now, I know a lot of people only look at it and they're like, 30% battery, she can buster farm, right? And that, okay, is notable. It's good having a 30% battery, good for buster farming, it synergizes with really good starting charge CEs as well for like 90 plus content, even though, you know, her power mod is Arthur enemies, which isn't all that many people. If you do run into them or they do start throwing those out with a little bit more regularity, I suppose, it could be kind of nice for those. But if you do want to bring her to more difficult content, because, you know, you could still bring your AoEs, or maybe you just want to use tomboy glasses over here, she does have a debuff removal for free on this, and she gives herself 50% defense for the turn, which isn't quite survivability, but it kind of is survivability at the same time, right? Because you're going to be significantly cutting down on the damage you're taking in that turn, and if you do need to live an extra turn, this might be able to get you through, because 50% defense ain't nothing, especially if you are, say, a more limited account and you are using, or would say, waiver. That's going to combine with his defensive buffs and his damage cut, and you could start getting to a level where you're just starting to face tank really hard-hitting bosses, as long as, you know, you do also have some nice HP going, right? You can't do it from like 1k HP, but one thing I hope they do throw her way is a guts, because Mordred is supposed to have like a guts skill. And so I am hoping that if they want to go back and kind of rebuff this skill again, maybe toss for the guts that's, you know, maybe just last for 3 turns, you know, 1-time guts for 3 turns, something along those lines. And then if they want to give her like 20% NP damage for 3 turns, or even for 3 times, because that seems to be kind of a theme they got going with Mordred, is that things are time-based and, you know, not actually turn-based. Something like that, or maybe like an anti-earth or whatever Artoria is, you know, type power mod, man attribute, whatever have you. That could also help her out a lot, because while she does have a pretty strong NP, I guess we'll just start looking at this right now, you know, refunding 20% on NP is really, really strong for your Buster Servants. It's what allowed Artoria, despite having a 30% NP battery, quote unquote, to loop before Oberon came out, because they would give themselves this extra 20%. And so that's really, really nice. It helps them out a lot when it comes to Buster looping. And it is something that I'm glad that they fixed, because originally this was 10%, which isn't quite as good. The only problem is she does have a strong power mod, a little bit stronger than normal ones, because normal ones are like 150 to 200%. Hers starts at 180, but you gotta remember it's Arthur enemies. There's not a whole lot of these guys running around. It's pretty much not all the Saber faces, but it's kind of like all the Artorias plus Arthur, I guess is the best way to say it. And you don't really run into these guys with all that much regularity, but I would say that once per event, you might run into like a Salter, who's kind of a common boss. Like Artoria does get thrown around in like dailies and such, so it's not like you'll never get the buff, but you're not really going to see it all that often. But still, with them buffing her first skill, her neutral damage is very respectable. And if you do find an Arthur enemy, let it be known that Mordred is going to absolutely cook them. That 180% power mod that she has, that extra 30% from normal power mods goes a long way in making her hit really, really hard. It's just, again, how often are you going to find your Arthur enemies? It's why I would really like them to give her, say, like an anti-earth damage mod, because, again, I believe like Artoria and Arthur and them are all like earth attribute dudes, because if they give her that, even if it's 50% on the third skill, that not only helps her out in letting her hit a lot of other servants, but it also opens up a bunch of the random mod enemies that you're able to fight, and you can just have her have a better time when it comes to farming. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I've kind of just been playing around with Mordred, finishing up Imaginary Scramble in the background and being like, you know, I'm going to have her go beat up some of these archers. How much is this Buster Crit do? And yeah, even though I'm really lacking mats over on JP, she's still performing quite well. I do like the performance I'm getting out of her. Unfortunately, I can't showcase her buster farming because I don't have Koyanskaya, but you know, your boy's saving up those Saint Quartz over here, and maybe when Koyanskaya comes back around, fingers crossed, I might be able to get my grubby little mitts on her. But as far as a letter grade goes for this servant, because I've been trying to do that with a lot of these more recent servant reviews, I think right now, if you look at her on NA, she gets like a C, a C+. She has some usages. It's just not the best option right now. She's very usable, but you're probably going to gravitate towards other options, especially if Mordred's like not necessarily your favorite servant. You know, I don't think Morgan's the best buster farmer, but I go out of my way to use her. That kind of situation where despite having people that can perform better, because they're your favorite servant, you go after and using them. But right now, definitely like a CC plus in that range. But over on JP, she's definitely risen to more of that like B plus, because her damage is a lot more consistent. It's a lot more free. They definitely patched a lot of things up, and she's a very, very solid buster looping servant. Although I do think it gets into a little bit of contentions when there's another unit that's also not limited called Artoria, you know, Dad over there, who does a lot more damage than she does. That's also very free. Mordred does have the power mod, but again, kind of rare. Our other competition is like Ibuki, which has the undead power mod, which you might see with more regularity because there's a lot more like undead mobs that are running around. There's also Altera, who gets a buff, but then again, Altera is pretty much also reliant on just free damage as well. Give her a power mod, please. Give her like some anti-divinity or something along those lines. I mean, the girl did go around and just slay all the other pantheons, right? Like, let her just have something, man. But yeah, that's kind of where I would put her considering both versions of the game. So just know CC plus, you know, fine enough servant. You know, that's not a failing grade, you know, if you got that back from your teacher. And then once they come back with the buff, once they kind of corrected their work a little bit, you give them a B plus, right? I think she definitely bumps up a little bit more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will catch you guys in the next one, though. Peace, late, guys.